Alrighty.
If you can just wait a second, yes, to get the confirmation from Alex.
Yeah, that's fine. Is Beckett on the call?
No, I don't see him. I tagged him on our Slack. Oh, it started. We are live.
All right, cool. Yeah, so I think we might as well kick it off now that we have 2 minutes. So yeah, everybody, welcome to the first Celestia Core Dev call. I'm going to explain a bit about the call in a second. This will be the one of many. We'll see, depending on proposals and stuff, whether this is going to be something that we do bi-weekly, every 2 weeks, or maybe every month, depending on the cadence, and it depends on the amount of submissions and proposals being sent. Now, the purpose of the Celestia Core Dev call is to coordinate with all everyone building on top of Celestia, from on the core dev client side of things, whether it's on the protocol itself, whether it's on the consensus layer, on the data availability layer. There's a few other things that we'll go over in CIP1, which just explain the process, so you can see other ways that people can contribute to the process. But before we get started, I would need to do a quick roll call for anyone who's representing any of the teams. On the consensus side, I need to do a roll call who's the representative of Celestia Core and App. I believe Evan's on the call, so if you can just say here or present, that would be fine.
Hello, present.
Awesome. On the data availability side, we have Celestia Node. I believe either Renee is here and Glib, but if any of you can just say you're here to represent.
Yeah.
And we also have Iger. I believe there's a few folks from Iger. If anyone can just verbally confirm that you guys are here.
Hey, we are there.
Oh,
Alrighty, awesome. And over time, we'll add more people who are building on top of the consensus or the protocol layer as part of the client teams. But for the first step, we're going to go over CIP1. I hope some of you might have maybe read it and stuff, but if not, that's fine. I'll go over it. And the purpose here is to explain what the process is, the history of such processes when it comes to standards, creating standards for any kind of open source protocol development process, and the purpose of it specifically for Celestia. Now, CIP, it stands for what we call a Celestia Improvement Proposal, which is a design document that provides information to the community, whether you want to describe a new feature that you want to implement or add on Celestia, or its processes or environment. Now, features can be on the core protocol itself. They can be on things that interact with the core protocol, or things maybe that don't really impact the protocol at all. Historically, if you want to look at the history behind these kind of processes, it started off with the IETF, the Internet Engineering Task Force, that created such a process, which allowed for open source development in a distributed way around the internet. And different teams that got inspired and utilized such a process over time. You have the PEP, which is around Python. You have Bitcoin improvement proposals, or the BIPs, and then the most famous one that we're all familiar with is the EIP, or the Ethereum improvement proposal. So this builds on things that already, most of it worked in other processes, with a few things tailored specifically to Celestia, mostly because we within the Celestia development landscape, you also have the consensus and the data availability layer. In a CIP, the author is responsible for building consensus within the community and documenting dissenting opinions regarding any kind of proposal. And what it means, in other words, the CIP author, the champion of their proposal. You can't just create a proposal and expect other people to champion it unless it's been explicitly said that somebody is they're we want to champion that proposal. The rationale is that it creates better mechanism for proposing features off-chain, which is much more important, allows us to interact more on the social layer versus doing things as some folks are more familiar in the Cosmos landscape, but that are more on-chain with voting. So here, it's not like that at all. Here, it's allows you to actually discuss things under technical merits specifically with your peers on whether a proposal is valid to be included to activate new features on Celestia. Now, there's several types of CIPs, right? So the one most people going to be interacting with from the core dev side will be what we call the standards track, right? And it has a lot of different examples, whether changing something in the network protocol, within the block, transaction validity rules, and it's divided into a lot of subsections. So you have the core component. Core is anything that requires a consensus fork that touches the consensus layer. And many things that are not necessarily consensus critical, but they are relevant. Whatever, especially if it's like a thing that a validator might be operating. Then you have the data availability track, which any kind of improvements that help on the data availability layer, which are not necessarily consensus breaking, but they're very relevant for nodes to upgrade after. We also have a networking track for lit P2P and the peer-to-peer layer, an interface track, which would be very helpful if you're coming as a rollup and you want to align with other rollups and say with the Celestia node and Eiger team who are representing the DA side on what would be like a basic or specification for the API RPC standards that allow you to interface and directly connect and submit blocks to Celestia. Then we have CRCs, which are, if you're familiar with EIPs, kind of like ERCs, which stand for Celestia Request for Comments, for sure. Here, it's things that are not really impact Celestia directly, but they're allow you to create different proposals. Like, for example, if you remember, one of the most famous ERCs in Ethereum is ERC20, which allowed people to create a standard around how do I token creation, right? For a smart contract. Now, Celestia doesn't have an execution environment, but there are a lot of things that you can build or propose as a standard that would be able to not necessarily impact the protocol, but people can adopt them and stuff if they follow like specific kind of standard. At the top of my head, one cool example would be like a standard around how do you format a namespace ID in such a way that it may be recognizable by a lot of rollups that decide to adopt such a standard around how do you construct a namespace ID. Then we have meta CIP, which describes multiple processes. So meta CIP, the most famous one you'll be able to see over time is for hard fork. So you'll be, in a meta CIP, you'd be able to see a reference to more than one CIP, which is why we call it the meta CIP. And that would just be a design document to explain what's going on, what's going to be activated in a future hard fork, right? And then you have informational CIPs. Now, informational CIPs, they're suggestion, recommendation, but nobody is required to follow them unless you want to. But they're there for like informational CIPs are there to help provide any kind of like work streams or overview and stuff. And you'll see an example in a bit. So the workflow around the Celestia improvement, the CIP workflow, like you want to shepherd it, shepherd a CIP. Let's say you have an idea proposal. The best place to start would be especially if you're if you're not talking to other core devs, especially people on this call. The best place to start would be on the forums, right? You post an idea of like, hey, what about if we add X or Y or improve Z within Celestia on this specific layer? So starting that conversation to see if two important things. If a lot of people align and think this is a net value add, And the second, if this hasn't been proposed before. Because if it's been proposed before, you can look at an existing CIP that's been proposed before, and you can use that for to understand like where that CIP has been from a status point of view. So specifically on core CIPs, they would be what we'll mostly be talking about in these calls is the core CIPs, right? Because they impact Celestia the most because they touch on the consensus portion. And they'll be scrutinized the most because, these are the most highly impactful CIPs in terms of like how they impact the network. So these will be mostly scrutinized, right? Now, how do we decide on core CIPs? It could be also applied to other tracks, but specifically for core CIP, there's a thing called what we call rough consensus. And this was been done since the IETF day. You can read the document here on what rough consensus means. So in rough consensus, it's like the TLDR on it is it's not voting. We don't vote. But it is mostly allows like a general rough consensus, which would be like the benchmark or rule of thumb is between 50 to 99% consensus or approval. In that sense is like, let's say there's 5 of us discussing the technical merit of a proposal. One person had an issue with one of the CIP being proposed and says that we shouldn't implement this. So in rough consensus, the way it works is like you don't ignore just because there's 4 out of 5, you ignore the concerns of the 5th person. You actually try to understand why the issues exist, what the 5th person trying to say, right? And you have to address those concerns. Because if the concerns have been addressed and the 4 out of 5 people still decide that,
recorded for note-taking and coaching purposes.
If the 4 out of 5 people address the concern and say, we understand your concern, and from a technical point of view, it doesn't impact the issue the way you're describing it, you still have rough consensus and you can move ahead. And this minimizes like a vocal minority and allows like things to move ahead. The only way you can decide like, hey, if you're the 5th person, you're like, no, but this is still a bad proposal. In that dynamic, the way it works is unless they have new information on why this proposal, for example, shouldn't be implemented, given if they only have their same old, arguments and stuff, given that's already been addressed, it's fine. Like rough consensus is still reached. So it's not 100% alignment. It's like we said, between 50 to 99%. And I would highly recommend checking out this document to see how rough consensus is practiced. This is how it's done in Ethereum, in IETF, and in Python specifically. And the burden is always on kind of implementers to, like if you decide that, hey, I think this feature is great, but you would have to get that consensus from the, client maintainers and stuff, because at the end of the day, somebody has to build it and stuff. And if there's no alignment, it's hard to get core dev to build a new feature if there's no alignment on that new feature. And then I'll try to wrap it up really quickly because it's still a draft mode. But basically, the CIP process, you have several different stages, right? There's the idea draft, which in the idea stage, you're just having a conversation on the forum. You don't have to even come up with a CIP yet because you're just testing out like the waters on whether such a proposal would enhance Celestia and if there's any alignment around it. And then you start out with a draft. You create a draft. We have a template here. Give you an example of what a CIP draft looks like. You can check it out here. And then when you do the draft, you can submit a pull request for the draft to this repository. Now, then you have what we call the CIP editors. CIP editor, I'm currently a CIP editor, and I'm going to nominate Josh, but anyone can be a CIP editor. It's mostly like the role of the CIP editor also covered elsewhere, but basically all you're doing is making sure that pull requests submitted to the CIP repo align with like first the template and it actually makes technical sense. Now, whether it's controversial or not, or whether this feature is major, there's no practical way to implement it is not, you know, the editor cannot decide on that, right? As long as it like makes sense enough from a technical point of view and it's like formatted according to the template guidelines, it's fine to approve it. And the CIP editor is the one who assigns a number for the CIP. And obviously, they can also decline a CIP if it's too broad, unfocused, or doesn't address specific things, or doesn't align with Celestia values and code of conduct. And then after a draft, right, let's say a CIP author can request with a pull request to change the status of a CIP to review. When you mark it for review, other peers can review it. And then finally, well, not finally, before moving it to final, which is like it's been accepted, we have what we call a last call. And the last call, typically takes 14 days. It's the last call for the CIP to be in the status before we move it to final. A final represents a final standard that's been added to the CIP process, but it doesn't necessarily mean this CIP has been activated. Activation can happen on this call, and it's informed by the meta CIP whether it's if we need a hard fork for it or not, using whether it's activated on mainnet. And then there's other statuses like random ones like stagnant if the CIP has been inactive for 6 months, withdrawn if the CIP author doesn't want to champion a proposal. And then we have a special one called living. So the CIP one, by moving it in this process to living, it becomes a living document, which means that if I can update it, I can update it over time. Anyone can update it if they have a pull request to how to enhance the CIP process. But normally, non-living documents, once it's final, you can't modify it anymore, right? But with a living document, it's fine. You can always update it over time. You can also look over what belong in a successful CIP, but I would leave that as an exercise to everyone, but to check it out on your own time. But like the preamble, the abstract, what's the motivation of your CIP, the specs, the actual specification and the rationale, backward compatibility test cases, these are all optional. And then security considerations for the CIP and copyright waiver. For copyright waiver, we're using Creative Commons license. And then, the preamble discusses the CIP number, title, description, author, category, what kind of category it is. I'm not going to go over these things because they just explain it more in depth and stuff. But I assume most folks have already linked to it. There's other sections like how do you link to other CIPs and stuff. You can check those out, or if you want to reference an external file or transferring CIP ownership. The only thing here would be for the CIP editors is I would recommend adding Josh Stein, who's also currently on, excuse me, on the Celestia DevRel team, and who'd be great as a CIP editor. And if anyone else within this call wants to become a CIP editor, feel free to reach out to me. It's a very straightforward process. I can go over on a separate call if anyone wants to also become a CIP editor. But I would also be adding Josh as a CIP editor. And you can briefly look at the CIP editor responsibilities. There's also CIP2, which talks more in depth about editors. And all of this stuff is mostly like the history of such a document, heavily derived from Ethereum BIP process, which is derived from Bitcoin BIP, which has been derived from Python's BIP. And with that said, I'm going to move back to the agenda. Give me a second. Okay. So far, I'm going to let y'all, if anyone has any questions on the CIP1 process so far, or any comments or feedback. Okay, so what I'll be doing next as a step, I'll make a pull request which adds Josh Stein as a CIP editor alongside me, and I'm going to move the status of the CIP from draft to last call. Technically should be in review stage. Forgot to add it there, but it should be moved to last call right now. So I'm going to move this to last call. I'm going to share it later so everyone can review it in last call. Last call will last 2 weeks. So within 2 weeks, we can activate the process officially, and then CIP V1 will be a living document that we can use for reference for the CIP process. Okay. If there's no more questions about the CIP one, we can move ahead. Is that okay with everybody? Cool. All right. So for the next steps, there'll be a proposal I have before we talk about any of the specific CIPs that have been submitted or ideas for CIPs. The next step will be a proposal for working groups, right? So currently, I would propose, it's already been done unofficially, but like I would propose a data availability working group, which includes Iger and Celestia node. Currently, Iger and Celestia node work closely because one is building a Golang client, one is building a Rust client for the data availability network. And I'll propose making it as a working group. The only difference there is if somebody like an external core dev want to participate in that working group, they would just have to contact somebody who's managing that working group and stuff. So I think for now, if anyone wants to be like a coach, like a chair the working group, can do that. And for the DA working group, the way it would work is they would be like a separate working group working on the DA layer. And if they have any kind of if the outcome of this working group is a CIP being proposed, given that they're the ones who manage the CIP side of things for the data availability layer, they're the best one to know what's best to be added to activate new features in the DA group. So with that, I would recommend between Iger and Celestia node, proposing somebody who's just like sharing this group. And basically recommendation is on your own cadence, having like either bi-weekly or monthly calls between Iger and Celestia node. You guys don't have to decide on it now. You can inform me later on this, and we can officially add some of that information if people want to reach out, if they have proposals for the data availability layer, they want to share it with that working group. They'll know how to reach out to somebody there. So I'll leave that as an exercise for Iger and Celestia node to among themselves. They can discuss it separately and let us know about who they decide will be facilitating that working group. Next on the agenda is an interface working group. Now, this doesn't have to happen right now, but it is a recommendation. So folks like, I believe, Astria and a few other rollups like Eclipse do work closely on the Node with the Node API. And this might be an opportunity for an interface working group around the Node API. At the same time, if you're like PK Labs or Modular Cloud and you do a lot of indexing on the core and app API, maybe there's a few things that you'd like to add or like part of like a specific standard and specs around the API itself on core and app. So for that, I would recommend an interface working group. However, it's up to y'all to decide on that. So maybe Josh or someone else can decide on that.
Yeah, I'm happy to chair like an interface working group. I think it would be useful to have Iger involved in this, since at least from our side, and I don't know specifically on Eclipse, but we're using the Iger Rust client to actually communicate with the node directly. So we do have, layers of stuff on top of that, but the like direct interface is there. So it would be useful to have kind of, there does need to be like some, relatively like tight coupling between what we would call them, like the node entity. So Iger and Celestia node team. And the interface, but happy to chair a working group if we want to move forward with that.
That sounds good. Okay. All right, so Josh sounds like you might want to move forward with that. Send me info, like we can talk about it after the call, then we can, create a way for if anyone wants to contribute to that working group, they'll find available information, most likely on the CIP GitHub repo, who to reach out to. I'm also been informed that Raman, who's leading the Celestia node team, would want to, I would nominate him to run the working group for the DA working group as well. Raman, if
Yeah, I'm in. That sounds good to me.
Awesome. So sounds like we have chairs for for both working groups. We can talk about it after the call and best recommendations and how to manage those working groups and how to allow if other external contributors want to participate in those working groups. Okay. Now moving forward. So there's two proposals that are actually now CIP draft. The rest are more like, a discussion about ideas that people want to propose, but there's no CIPs there. So for the first call, that's fine because this is the first call we're doing. I would recommend for future calls to come up even with like a simple draft, like a CIP draft or idea that you want to discuss so that people have something they can reference. But with that said, for the first call, this is the first kickoff call, we're all participating from the beginning. Let's start off with the consensus critical min fee proposal. I believe this is by Evan.
I think Colin will be writing it, so Colin, feel
Okay.
free to take this if you're on the call. If not, I can.
This is the global min gas price.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is something we have we're working on at the moment. I estimate a CIP to start reviewing it by next week. Would you mind to go through the details of this, or is it something that we would rather save for in a week's time?
Up to you, yes. I'm not sure on the structure on this.
It's mostly if you guys want to talk about it among our peers and core devs. Yeah, for the next time, I think in the call would be maybe I'm going to book another call for in 2 weeks' time. Having a CIP draft would be helpful so people can review it more in person. Be able to read it and stuff. But yeah, if you guys want to talk about it now before you make the CIP draft, this will be the opportunity to do that.
Yeah, I think it's better
cool.
once we have an actual document that people can look at, so something that can be discussed. So I think, and the plan for that is to be by next week.
Okay, this sounds good. So yeah, whenever you guys have one, submit a pull request, and we'll take a look from the.
We can do a
side.
quick summary if we
please.
for the consensus critical min fee, or a better term is a consensus critical gas price, minimum gas price. So this is very similar to EIP 1559, where you have some sort of function that determines a minimum fee or a minimum fee rate that must be paid by each transaction that gets included in a block. Where that fee actually goes is TBD. So whether it's burned, given to delegators, etc., is not strictly, as far as I understand, part of the CIP. But how you actually calculate that minimum fee rate is definitely something that I think will probably be discussed in this proposal, or it might be in a separate CIP. But that's just a very quick summary so that people have an idea of what it is.
Amazing. If nobody had thoughts about the high-level proposal, once there's a forum post about it, people can share more thoughts there and stuff for discussion offline. The second one will be converting ADRs to CIPs for the mechanism behind upgrading for V2 and the signaling mechanism that will be used afterwards. I believe that's also Evan.
Yeah, we don't, this is another one where, we don't have CIPs for any of these, so we could just go through very quick summaries. This is where we have Celestia got rid of in V1, the current version that's on mainnet. It doesn't actually have the normal upgrade mechanism that you would find in the Cosmos SDK. Instead of having governance sort of approve some binary and then you restart all at one height, instead we actually have a new binary that is backwards compatible with V1 and V2, and then you actually run that, and then once once enough validators have signaled that they have upgraded to V2, then the upgrade process actually happens all in one single binary, so you don't even have to restart at that point. So that's sort of the CIP for our, that's like, we have a lot of things written about that. We've been working on that for a while, since like V1, before even V1 was out. So we just need to sort of convert some of that stuff to a CIP.
Amazing. I look forward to that proposal as well. I think it'll be really exciting to see new upgrade mechanism. I think they're just starting CIP for adopting relayer incentivization middleware. I forgot who posted that. I think it might be Evan.
That was me.
Oh,
Sorry.
hey. Okay.
We'll write a CIP, but basically the middleware is to incentivize delivery of packets with IBC, the full packet lifecycle. So, but yeah, I guess just write a CIP and have it actually laid out for proper discussion.
Sounds good. Is this for the relayer stuff? Where would that be on the stack? Is that Evan? Would that be on core or is that on?
Yeah, it would be in core. We would add it to whenever we initialize the IBC module, we would add in some middleware.
Okay. Awesome. So yeah, Susanna, whenever you guys can, submit a pull request for the CIP, and we'll be happy to review it. To include it as a draft so that people can review it after and stuff, and we can discuss it more further. Starting a CIP for gas refunds.
Yeah. So I think Retool will be probably helping to write this and implement it. So Retool, chime in if you have a different understanding of this. But my understanding of this is the Cosmos SDK at the moment doesn't actually refund gas. So whenever I submit a transaction, I specify a gas limit, and that's the amount of gas that I end up paying no matter what, even if the actual gas used is significantly lower. So what this proposal would do is effectively at somewhere along the execution of the transaction is we would refund for you effectively only pay for the gas that you used. And that's it.
Great. And then starting a CIP for adopting the packet forward middleware. I'm not sure, would that Evan as well? Or?
Yeah, so I've spoken with the Strangelove team about this, and they've already done a lot of great work around the packet forward middleware. So they have, if they want to, and if they have time, I'm sure they're very busy, they can champion the CIP. But if not, we will also write the CIP for adopting the PFM.
Yeah, Evan, we'd love to help work on that. I think Alex from my team has expressed desire to do this. We've got a couple other CIPs we'd like to work through moving forward. So excited that this is the first one. And thank you guys for soliciting this. Really appreciate it.
Dope.
Amazing. Awesome. All right. And then starting a CIP for the SNARK protected accounts.
Yeah. So I think this is the last CIP on the list? I think so. So this is something that we're starting. I don't think that this was going to be included on mainnet anytime soon. However, it is a very cool feature, and we sort of want to start getting people thinking about this. So really, like maybe doing what we're supposed to do with CIPs, where we start the process like a very far earlier from when it actually gets included in a release. But yeah, so a SNARK account is, I don't want to get too far in the weeds, and it probably wouldn't make too much sense to explain it very much here, but effectively you have a normal account. It does everything that a normal account would do, except for instead of being protected, meaning like I have to authorize it, someone has to give permission for that transaction to do something. Usually that's done with a signature. Well, instead of being a signature here, this would be just an arbitrary SNARK. And the benefits of this is it's sort of like a very flexible abstraction around bridging. So like most of like what a bridge does is it just like withdraws and deposits funds. And the whole thing with like Celestia is Celestia has to be state minimized. So we don't really want to have like smart contracts or arbitrary things that you would otherwise like require for like a bridge. So, and if you wanted to, you could technically have like a ZK rollup that verifies quite a few different things, like the fork choice rule and the state, and I'm probably forgetting like 2 or 3 other things. And effectively, that's all done inside of Snark. And if that's all done, then you can withdraw and deposit funds. And some call this settling, but the benefit here is that it's extremely state minimized. So it has the same amount of state as a normal account, which makes it very palatable for the Celestia state machine. And I think that's it. I'll keep rambling about it if we keep going. So it's a very cool feature, and there's a lot that you can actually do with it. I'm very excited for it, but we kind of want to get that rolled out. The implementation, the last thing, is the implementation of this is actually on the Celestia side, I think actually quite simple. But the harder part, of course, is building a rollup that can actually do this in a safe way and like secure funds. But so that's why we kind of want to start the process now. Ideally, we'd even have like make this so that anyone can spin up their own test network, maybe like a version of Arabica or something that actually has this feature included sometime within like the next 6 months. So then we can actually start building on this feature.
Amazing. Well, this sounds really exciting. I think Marco had a few comments in the chat about it. But yeah, I mean, for now, I think like we'll get started once we have like some CIPs in the pipeline. Alrighty. Moving on. Okay, so normally in these calls, I don't necessarily want to move, cover informational CIPs like other informational CIPs, but just given it was the first call, I'll allow it. For this one, I believe there's a champion for the CIP 5, which is to rename data availability to data publishing. I don't know if the author of the proposal's on the call. Are you on the call? I think his username is Few. But yeah, I'm not sure if he's available on the call. If you are, just raise your hand or just unmute yourself. If not, because I believe you should have had the Zoom information. Now, when it comes to informational CIPs, like the one about like moving the terminology from data availability to data publishing, it's only informational. Like it's not necessarily required for anyone to align with an informational CIP, right? So yeah, for the future, we don't necessarily have to cover informational CIPs within this call for everyone's time. The next one is CIP4, to standardize data expiry time for pruned node. Now, normally this will be happening within the data availability working group because it's related to data availability. But Mustafa, if you like, you want to give a brief overview of it just for everyone here, even though this will be more covered in the working group.
Yeah, I mean, it also makes sense to cover it here briefly because it kind of has potential applications on the core data, the core network as well. But the general idea here is that, like right now, Celestia node does not prune historical blocks, and the Tendermint nodes in the consensus network have a pruning flag for minimum retained blocks, but there's no kind of like recommendation about what it should be. Now, as people know, the purpose of data availability layers is not to guarantee the permanent storage of historical data, but to make sure that data was published to the internet so that anyone that wants to download it can download it. And I guess that's kind of like why people are proposing to rename data availability to data publication so it's more clear. But as part of that, we want to kind of set a expectation for how long that data will be downloadable. And that's what the CIP proposes. it proposes that if you're running a pruned node, then you should store at least 30 days worth of blocks and also distribute to the network, to anyone that asked for it, 30 days worth of historical blocks. And so then the sexual expectation would be that if you post data to Celestia, then the network is kind of guarantees that will at least be downloadable for 30 days. And after that, you can only download it from archival nodes, basically. And the rationale for 30 days is because it's longer than the 21 days unbundling period for Tendermint, or the weak subjectivity period for Tendermint. And the data availability sampling nodes need to at least sample data within the weak subjectivity period to independently verify the data availability of the chain. So that's why it needs to be at least 21 days. So 30 days provides a sort of buffer for that. And 30 days is a reasonable amount of time for anyone that wants to download the data to download it. And also EIP, I think 30 days is also proposed in EIP 4844. So it's kind of like an industry standard, but I also need to double check if that's still the case.
Sounds good. This will be more championed and discussed more in the data availability working group. But thank you for this overview, Mustafa. The last item here is I'll be submitting a CIP at some point just to capture what are the current on-chain governance parameters in a living document. Now, this is already part of you can find it on the Celestia core app specification, but capturing it within a CIP, like what are the on-chain governance parameters that are active and what are those parameters, like what are the key value pairs? In a CIP that's a living document because it can't be finalized because things can be modified on chain after. So that's why I would recommend doing it as a living document. I'll be proposing that hopefully in 2 weeks' time. Now, finally, I also been made aware, I think also for the interface working group, Glib wants to also help co-chair. And I think that's a great idea because you have Josh Bowen representing from the roll-up side and Glib from both CoreNAP and Celestia Node on the API interface side. So that way it can align both folks who are the users and the people who are building the API to come up with a standard. So I'll talk to y'all both after to figure it out together and, what are the next steps. With that said, I actually extended this call for like an hour, like 90 minutes, but I think because we don't have the CIP drafts ready yet, we kind of sped through it, which is fine. I think we're at the end of the call. So the action item so far is like, I'll reach out for the DA working groups and the interface working groups directly. I'll move CIP1 to last call, and people will see the status move to last call, and then that gives you all 2-week period to review it before it becomes active. And that would include Josh Stein as one of the CIP editors. With that said, any final thoughts, any questions so far? For the next call, I'm going to schedule it 2 weeks from now. And that would probably be the last call for December because the holidays are coming up, and then we'll kickstart, we'll continue the core dev calls starting in January after that. So I'll send more information about the next call coming up, and we'll create an agenda. This call is recorded, so people can review the video after the call, and yeah, we can take it from there. Any final thoughts? Any final comments? Alrighty, I don't think there's anything. Let me double check on the chat. Somebody chatted. Okay, cool. With that said, thank you all for attending. I know it's taking time out of everyone's busy day. Very excited about this, especially about coordinating with a lot of people who want to build on top of Celestia or building Celestia itself. And really excited to see so many people attending. And this is, the start of something really cool. So yeah, I'll see y'all in 2 weeks.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you, guys.
Cheers,
Bye,
cheers.
bye.
Cheers, cheers.
Cheers.
Sure.